In America, an innocent black person is 7 times more likely to be wrongly convicted of murder than an innocent white person. This is the story of one of those sentences, of a judge who handed down 2 decades to a teenager, and of the moment a single piece of hidden evidence unraveled his courtroom forever. The teenager was Marcus Johnson, 17 years old, convicted in a Richmond County courtroom based on a single eyewitness who later recanted. The judge was Harold Finch, a 30-year veteran known for harsh sentences, and the woman standing in the gallery was not just a mother. She was Major Alara Vance, a Pentagon intelligence analyst who, during the trial, had begun quietly reviewing the evidence against her son. What she found in those case files wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. The case began on a rainy November night with a convenience store robbery gone wrong. The clerk was shot. The security camera footage was grainy, showing a figure in a dark hoodie. There were no fingerprints, no murder weapon recovered. But within 48 hours, the police had a suspect, 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, picked from a photo array by a shaken customer who'd been buying cigarettes. Marcus had no prior record. He was a B student with an after-school job, but he lived 3 blocks from the store and he fit a description: a young black male, medium build. In the chaotic days after the shooting, under pressure from the media and the victim's family, that was enough for an arrest. The district attorney, Richard Shaw, saw a quick, decisive win. He filed for Marcus to be tried as an adult. Judge Harold Finch presided. With a conviction rate of 94% in his courtroom, most cases never saw a jury. They ended in plea deals. The public defender assigned to Marcus, a young attorney named Lisa Cho buried under 60 other cases, urged him to take a deal: 15 years for manslaughter. Maintain your innocence, she warned him, and if you lose at trial, Judge Finch will bury you. But Marcus refused. He wouldn't admit to something he didn't do. His mother, Alara Vance, was 7,000 miles away in Qatar when she got the call. A Pentagon intelligence analyst, she was midway through a 90-day deployment. She caught the first transport home, arriving to find her son in county jail, and a legal system moving with a cold, impersonal speed. She sat in the front row of every pretrial hearing, wearing her uniform, taking meticulous notes. The judge rarely looked at her. The prosecutor dismissed her as a grieving mother in denial. The evidence was paper-thin but strategically presented. The eyewitness, a man named Carl Riggs, pointed directly at Marcus in court. He was certain, he told the jury, 100%. What the jury didn't hear was that Riggs had initially told police he couldn't see the shooter's face. They didn't hear that during the photo array, the detective had said, "Take your time, but we think we got the guy." A classic unintentional cue. Lisa Cho objected, but Judge Finch overruled her. He called it foundational procedure. Alara Vance began working the case like an intelligence target. While Lisa prepared for trial, Alara started building a parallel file. She used her leave time to visit the convenience store, mapping sightlines. She requested public records on similar robberies in the county, and she began looking into the other players. She learned that DA Richard Shaw was in a heated primary election, touting his tough-on-crime record. She learned that Judge Finch had sent more juveniles to adult prison than any other judge in the circuit, a fact that had earned him the nickname 20-Year Finch among defense attorneys. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution's case was the eyewitness, the grainy video, and the testimony of the arresting officer, who emphasized Marcus's lack of remorse because he maintained his innocence. The defense had only an alibi from Marcus's coworker, which the prosecutor dismantled by highlighting a 15-minute gap in the timeline. Lisa Cho gave a passionate closing argument about reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, their faces were blank. Guilty on all counts. Now came sentencing. In Judge Finch's courtroom, this was a formality. The probation report, a standard pre-sentencing investigation, recommended a mitigated sentence based on Marcus's age, clean record, and strong family support. Finch barely glanced at it. He asked Marcus if he had anything to say. Marcus, his voice trembling but clear, said, "I'm innocent, sir. I didn't do this." Finch's expression didn't change. He called the crime a brutal, senseless act that shook the community. He said trying Marcus as an adult had been the correct decision, and that a message needed to be sent. Then he pronounced the sentence, 20 years in a state penitentiary with eligibility for parole after serving 85%. Alara Vance felt the air leave the room. Her son, a child, was being erased. The gavel slammed down, and as the bailiffs moved to take Marcus away, something in Alara's professional training snapped into focus. It was a pattern she'd seen before, not in a courtroom, but in intelligence briefings. The consolidation of flawed evidence, the dismissal of contradictory facts, the unwavering certainty of a predetermined outcome. Stood up. The wooden gallery bench creaked. All eyes turned to her. Judge Finch frowned, impatient with the disruption. "You'll have to sit down, ma'am," he said. But Alara Vance was no longer just a mother in the gallery. She was an analyst who had just connected the dots. She reached under her blouse and pulled out her Pentagon identification badge, letting it hang clearly from its lanyard. She looked directly at Judge Harold Finch and said 3 words that were not a plea, but a statement of fact. "I have proof." The courtroom froze. The prosecutor half rose from his chair. Judge Finch's face, a moment ago a mask of stern authority, went pale. The proof Alara Vance referred to wasn't about the robbery. It was about him. In her late-night research, cross-referencing judicial records with property databases and campaign finance reports, she had found a thread. It led to a shell company, a private land deal, and a series of campaign donations from a development firm that had business regularly before his court. It was a conflict of interest buried in plain sight, a breach of judicial ethics so clear it could end a career. But in that stunned silence, as the bailiffs hesitated and her son turned toward her with desperate hope, Alara Vance realized the dangerous ground she now stood on. She had just threatened a powerful judge with exposure, and she had done it in open court, with no backup, and no guarantee that the evidence in her files was enough to protect her son or herself. The gavel was down, but the real battle was just beginning. The silence in the courtroom lasted only 3 seconds, but it was absolute. Then chaos erupted. Judge Finch, his pallor now a sickly gray, slammed his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order. The prosecutor, Richard Shaw, was on his feet, demanding the bailiffs remove that woman. But the bailiffs hesitated, their eyes fixed on the Pentagon badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Alara Vance did not move. She kept her gaze locked on Finch. "Your Honor, I can present this evidence to the State Judicial Conduct Commission right now," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Or we can discuss a stay of my son's sentence while a true investigation is conducted. The choice is yours." It was a breathtaking gamble. She was leveraging a potential ethics violation to halt a criminal sentence. In the legal world, it was like using a firecracker to stop a freight train. Finch called for an immediate recess. He stormed into his chambers, the prosecutor hot on his heels. Marcus was led back to the holding cell, confused and hopeful, and Alara was escorted by a court officer into a small, windowless conference room. For 20 minutes, she sat alone, listening to the muffled shouts next door. She reviewed the files on her encrypted tablet. The land deal was the key. A company called Greenway Holdings had purchased a parcel of distressed commercial property from a defendant in Finch's court for a fraction of its value. That defendant had his charges reduced from felony embezzlement to a misdemeanor. Finch's campaign treasurer was listed as Greenway's registered agent. The door flew open. Richard Shaw entered, followed by a furious Judge Finch, now without his robes. "This is extortion, plain and simple," Shaw spat. "You interfere with a judicial proceeding, you threaten a sitting judge, I'll have you brought up on charges so fast your head will spin." Alara slid the tablet across the table. On the screen was the property record, the campaign finance report, and the court docket number. "This isn't a threat, counselor. It's a disclosure. I am a federal officer with a duty to report evidence of serious corruption. I'm giving you the chance to do the right thing first. Vacate the sentence. Order a new trial." Finch stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face once more. He had assumed her proof was about the case, some misplaced evidence. This was far worse. This was career annihilation. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Public records," Alara said. "Cross-referenced. It's what I do for a living." Shaw tried to bluster. "This is circumstantial nonsense, a coincidence," but the confidence in his voice was gone. He was calculating the political fallout, the headlines. DA star judge implicated in bribery scandal. A deal was struck in that room, but it wasn't justice. It was a ceasefire. Judge Finch would not vacate the sentence. He could not, he said, without appearing improperly influenced. Instead, he would grant an emergency 60-day stay of commitment. Marcus would remain in the county jail, not the state prison, while new evidence was reviewed. In return, Alara would not immediately file her report with the Judicial Commission. She would give the court time to investigate the allegations internally. It was a hollow victory. Her son was still convicted, still in custody, but she had bought time, and she had exposed a nerve. When news of the dramatic stay hit the local press, the narrative splintered. The initial story was pure tabloid gold. Pentagon mom stopped sentencing with secret badge. But within hours, the prosecutor's office spun their version. They described Alara as a distraught parent who had made unspecified allegations to delay her son's well-deserved punishment. They painted her use of her official badge as an intimidating abuse of power. The comment sections filled with both support and vitriol. Alara knew the clock was ticking. 60 days. She needed to attack the case itself, not just the judge. She went back to the original case file, now with the fresh eyes of someone who knew the system was capable of rot. She started with the eyewitness, Carl Riggs. A deeper background check revealed he had 3 prior arrests for fraud. More importantly, she found a police report from 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest. Riggs had been picked up for public intoxication. During the booking, he had reportedly bragged to a cellmate about putting some kid away and getting a sweet deal from the cops. This was the break, witness coercion. She contacted Lisa Cho, the public defender, who was shocked but not surprised. Lisa admitted she felt the case was off but was too overwhelmed to dig. Together, they filed a motion for post-conviction relief based on prosecutorial misconduct and new evidence. Judge Finch, of course, recused himself from the hearing. The new judge, a colleague, denied the motion within a week, calling Riggs's jailhouse boast hearsay. The wall was closing in, day 30 of the stay. Alara then made a decision that shifted the entire battlefield. If the local system was closed, she would go federal. Using her security clearance and contacts, she formally requested the case file of the convenience store shooting be reviewed by the FBI Civil Rights Division. Their mandate: investigate patterns of corruption that deprive persons of their constitutional rights. The moment that request was logged, the dynamic changed. Richard Shaw wasn't just fighting a determined mother anymore. He was potentially facing federal agents. But the system fought back. A week later, Alara was summoned by her commanding officer at the Pentagon. A formal complaint had been lodged by the Richmond County District Attorney's Office, accusing her of misusing her government position and classified resources to interfere in a state criminal matter. She was placed on immediate administrative leave. Her security access was suspended. The badge she had flashed in the courtroom was now useless. It was a masterstroke. They had stripped her of her power and credibility in one move. Worse, they went after her son. In county jail, Marcus was suddenly written up for 3 minor infractions in as many days: insolence, refusing an order, having an untidy cell. The infractions were a pretext to move him to solitary confinement for his own safety. It was psychological torture for him and for her. She could no longer visit him freely. The message was clear: stand down or your son suffers. Broken, out of options, and running out of time, Alara did the only thing she had left. She went to the media. Not the local paper, but an investigative journalist named Anya Sharma at a major national network, who had a track record of exposing wrongful convictions. She handed over everything: the shaky eyewitness ID, the jailhouse boast, the property records implicating Judge Finch, and the suspicious timing of the DA's complaint against her. "I've hit every wall," Alara told her, voice raw. The system is designed to protect itself. You're my last wall. Anya and her team descended on Richmond County. They started pulling threads, and the first thread they pulled unraveled something much bigger than Marcus's case. They examined the last 10 years of Judge Finch's murder and robbery trials. Using public data, they found a staggering anomaly. In cases where the defendant was black and represented by a public defender, Finch's conviction rate was 98%. His average sentence in those cases was 22 years. For white defendants with private attorneys, the conviction rate dropped to 70%, with an average sentence of 9 years. The statistical disparity was so extreme it couldn't be explained by chance. Then they found the others. A man named Derek Boone, who had served 12 years for an armed robbery, Finch sentenced him for before the actual stolen property was found in another county. A woman named Lena Washington, who took a plea deal for a murder she swore she didn't commit because Finch had threatened her with the death penalty if she went to trial. Her co-defendant, who testified against her, later recanted. These people weren't just statistics, they were a pattern. And the pattern pointed straight at Harold Finch. Armed with this data, Anya Sharma confronted District Attorney Richard Shaw on camera outside his office. She asked him about the racial sentencing disparities and the allegations of quid pro quo corruption with Judge Finch. Shaw, flustered and angry, stated, "Judge Finch's record is beyond reproach. These allegations are a desperate smear campaign by convicted criminals and their allies." But the footage of his defensive, angry reaction was damning. The national story was no longer about a mysterious Pentagon mom. It was now about a tough-on-crime courtroom where justice was for sale. The pressure became a torrent. The State Judicial Conduct Commission, feeling the heat from the national spotlight, announced it was expediting its preliminary inquiry into Judge Finch. The FBI confirmed it was assessing the request for a civil rights investigation. And in his chambers, Harold Finch was reportedly meeting with high-priced criminal defense lawyers. The fortress was cracking. On day 58 of the 60-day stay, Alara Vance received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, tense, and familiar. It was Lisa Cho, the public defender. "I need to see you," Lisa said. "I found something they never turned over to me during discovery. I think it changes everything." They agreed to meet at a quiet park outside the city. As Alara drove, her mind raced. What could be more damning than what they already had? But Lisa's tone wasn't just excited, it was terrified. She had broken a rule, accessed a sealed file, and what she found wasn't just proof of Marcus's innocence. It was proof of someone else's guilt. Under the dim glow of a park lamp, Lisa Cho's hands shook as she handed Alara a flash drive. "It's a sealed supplemental report from the crime lab," she whispered. "It was never entered into evidence, never given to me. They logged it into the system the day after Marcus was arrested, and then it was marked inadmissible and buried." Alara plugged the drive into her phone. The document that loaded wasn't about Marcus. It was a ballistics report. The bullet that killed the clerk had been compared to bullets from 3 other unsolved convenience store robberies in the county over the past 2 years. It was a match. All 4 shootings were from the same gun. The report concluded the crimes were likely committed by the same person. This changed everything. The prosecution's entire theory was that Marcus, a first-time offender, had snapped and committed a one-time robbery. This evidence pointed to a serial offender, a professional. "Why was this inadmissible?" Alara asked, her mind racing. Lisa looked away. "Because of how they got the comparison samples. The ballistics database flag came from an FBI database search, but the warrant for that search, it was questionable. The detective wrote the warrant for Marcus's case but used it to run ballistics for dozens of other unsolved crimes. A fishing expedition. A judge might have thrown it out, so Shaw's office just pretended it didn't exist." This was no longer just about hiding exculpatory evidence. This was about the district attorney's office suppressing evidence of an active serial criminal to secure a conviction in a high-profile case. They had prioritized closing a file over public safety. Alara felt a cold fury. Who else knows about this? Just the original detective, the crime lab tech, and someone in Shaw's office who sealed it, Lisa said. I only found it because I still have access to the internal docketing system. I searched for any document with Marcus's name that had a restricted flag. The next morning, Alara and Anya Sharma's team confronted the lead detective, a veteran named Miller, at his home. Confronted with the report and the threat of a national broadcast about a covered-up serial killer, he cracked. He admitted he'd been pressured by the DA's office to focus on making the Johnson case stick. He was told the ballistics link was a distraction. He was given a choice: be a team player and get a promotion, or make waves. He chose the promotion. With this sworn statement from the detective, the story exploded beyond judicial corruption into a massive prosecutorial misconduct scandal. The narrative was now airtight: a corrupt judge, a ruthless DA hiding evidence, and an innocent teenager taking the fall. The state attorney general's office, facing a media firestorm, announced it was taking over the investigation into both Marcus Johnson's conviction and the broader conduct of the Richmond County DA's office. But Richard Shaw wasn't finished. In a desperate countermove, he held a press conference. He didn't defend the ballistics report. Instead, he attacked Alara Vance personally. He revealed leaking confidential personnel records, that she had been placed on administrative leave by the Pentagon for unstable behavior and misuse of government assets. He painted her as a fanatic, a mother so unhinged by grief that she was concocting wild conspiracies. He announced he was petitioning to revoke the stay of Marcus's sentence, arguing that the fraudulent pretext for the delay had been exposed. It worked momentarily. The headlines blurred. Some outlets led with cover-up exposed, others led with Pentagon analysts deemed unstable. The public was confused. The state attorney general's office, cautious and political, paused its takeover, citing conflicting allegations. Alara was back against the wall. Her credibility, her weapon, had been publicly shattered by the very system she was fighting. She was adrift on leave, with the 60-day stay set to expire in 48 hours. Then she received an email. It was from a man named David Ferris, the crime lab technician who had authored the buried ballistics report. The subject line was, "I can't be quiet anymore." They met in a crowded downtown coffee shop. Ferris, a nervous man in his 50s, slid a folder across the table. "The ballistics report was just the first page," he said. "Turn it over." On the back was a handwritten note, an internal memo from an assistant district attorney to Richard Shaw. It was dated the day after the ballistics match was confirmed. It read, "Per our discussion, confirming the link to the Palmer and Greeley cases would introduce reasonable doubt. The Johnson case is otherwise strong. Recommend we sequester the ballistics analysis and proceed. The priority is a conviction." Shaw had initialed it. "I found it paper-clipped to the report copy they made me shred," Ferris said. "I kept this one. I've been carrying it for 18 months. This was the smoking gun. Not just negligence, but a deliberate, documented order to suppress evidence. This was a felony." Alara took this evidence, not to the press, but straight to the FBI agent now leading the civil rights assessment. The agent, seeing a documented federal civil rights violation, the willful deprivation of due process, finally had the predicate to open a full criminal investigation. Warrants were drafted. Two things happened simultaneously. First, the FBI served a warrant on the district attorney's office, seizing all files related to the 4 linked shootings. Second, the State Judicial Commission, having completed its expedited inquiry, filed formal misconduct charges against Judge Harold Finch, recommending his immediate suspension. The twin blows paralyzed the local power structure. On the final day of the stay, with Marcus still in solitary confinement, a new hearing was called. But it wasn't in a Richmond County courtroom. It was in federal district court. The judge was a stern, no-nonsense federal appointee. Richard Shaw and his team sat at the defense table, but they were not in charge. The federal government was now a party, represented by a Justice Department attorney. Alara Vance sat in the front row, wearing not her uniform but a simple black suit. She was a witness, a victim, and a catalyst. The hearing was not about Marcus's guilt or innocence. It was about whether his constitutional rights had been so egregiously violated that his conviction could not stand. The federal attorney presented the ballistics report, the detective's statement, and the initialed memo from Shaw. He called it a staggering breach of the public trust. The federal judge didn't even call for rebuttal from Shaw. He looked at the evidence, then at Marcus Johnson, who appeared via video link from jail looking hollow and tired. The judge's words were simple and devastating. The evidence before this court demonstrates a fundamental and intentional corruption of the judicial process. The conviction of Marcus Johnson is vacated, effective immediately. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. He is to be released from custody today. The gavel fell. There were no cheers in the sterile federal courtroom, just a profound, resonant silence. Then, the sound of Alara Vance letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a year. Her son was free. But as she watched the federal marshals move toward Richard Shaw to serve him with a subpoena to appear before a grand jury, and as she read the news alert that Judge Finch had resigned in disgrace, she realized something. Winning her son's freedom was only the first step. The system that had tried to consume him was still intact. It had bent, but it had not broken. And as Marcus walked out of the county jail that evening into the blinding flash of news cameras, Alara knew the real battle was just beginning. The fight to ensure no other mother would ever need a Pentagon badge to get justice for her child. The fight to dismantle the machine. Marcus Johnson's first night of freedom was spent in a quiet hotel room, away from the cameras. He was free, but he was not whole. The year spent in county jail, much of it in solitary, had carved something out of him. He was now a statistic, one of the 3,000 exonerees in the National Registry, and one of the nearly 1,500 who are black. The legal and political dominoes began to fall with methodical force. Within a month, a state grand jury indicted former District Attorney Richard Shaw on 6 felony counts, including obstruction of justice, official misconduct, and violation of civil rights. The evidence was the initialed memo, the buried ballistics report, and testimony from the detective and the lab tech. His law license was suspended. The tough-on-crime prosecutor was now facing up to 20 years in prison himself. Judge Harold Finch, having resigned, avoided criminal indictment but was disbarred for life. The Judicial Commission's public report was scathing, detailing not only the corrupt land deal, but also the egregious and persistent pattern of racial bias in sentencing. His legacy was permanently rewritten from respected jurist to a case study in judicial corruption. The courthouse where he'd presided for 3 decades quietly removed his portrait from the Hall of Judges. But Alara Vance knew that removing 2 bad actors did not fix a broken system. The machinery that had processed Marcus, the overburdened public defenders, the incentivized plea deals, the unchecked prosecutorial power, was still operating. So she turned her analyst's mind to a new target: systemic reform. Using her reinstated position at the Pentagon, she leveraged her security clearance in an unexpected way to access declassified data analysis methodologies used for pattern-of-life analysis. She adapted them to create a powerful algorithm designed to flag potential wrongful convictions. She partnered with the Innocence Project and a coalition of civil rights lawyers. Their new initiative was called the Sentinel Protocol. It ingested public court records, sentencing data, and demographic information, looking for the red flags that had marked Marcus's case. Convictions based on a single eyewitness, drastic sentencing disparities by judge, and cases where exculpatory evidence was disclosed late or not at all. In its first 6 months, the Sentinel Protocol identified over 200 cases nationally for urgent review. Back in Richmond County, the fallout created space for real change. The new district attorney, elected in a special election after Shaw's indictment, established the state's first independent conviction integrity unit. Their first act was to review the 4 ballistically linked shootings. With fresh eyes and the actual evidence, they identified a suspect within weeks: a man already in prison for an unrelated armed robbery. His fingerprint, missed in the initial chaotic processing of Marcus's crime scene, was a match on the convenience store counter. He confessed to all 4 shootings. The closure brought little comfort to the victims' families, but it confirmed the horrifying truth. The drive for a quick conviction had left a violent serial offender on the streets for 18 additional months. Marcus, meanwhile, tried to rebuild. The state offered a wrongful conviction settlement of $1.2 million, the standard compensation. It was a life-changing sum, but it couldn't buy back the year of his youth, the trauma, or the stigma. He became an advocate, speaking at law schools about the human cost of prosecutorial misconduct. He worked with his mother on the Sentinel Protocol, providing the crucial end-user perspective on how the system feels from the inside. And then came the final, surprising twist, one that brought the story full circle in a way no one expected. The federal investigation into the Richmond County DA's office, having torn through the files, discovered that the corrupt relationship between Shaw and Judge Finch was more than a one-off land deal. It was a small part of a larger, informal network. They found evidence suggesting that several private defense attorneys, who made large campaign donations to Shaw, routinely received favorable plea deals for their clients from Judge Finch. The system wasn't just biased against the poor, it was also effectively pay-to-play for the connected. This revelation triggered a second wave of exonerations. 5 more individuals, all represented by overworked public defenders and sentenced harshly by Finch, had their convictions overturned. Their cases bore the same hallmarks: weak evidence, rushed trials, and disproportionate sentences. One of them was Derek Boone, who had served 12 years for a robbery he didn't commit. He walked free 3 decades after his sentencing, another life nearly consumed by the machine. Ilara Vance watched these subsequent victories with a complex pride. Her fight had started to save one life, her son's. It had ended up helping to free 6 others and exposing a corruption ring that stretched across the local legal ecosystem. The Pentagon, initially wary of her activism, now highlighted her work as an example of applied critical thinking and ethical leadership. The story of the mother with the Pentagon badge became more than a viral moment. It became a catalyst. It inspired legislation in 14 states to strengthen rules for disclosing exculpatory evidence, reforms known collectively as Shaw-Finch laws. It fueled a national conversation about the deadly intersection of racial bias and prosecutorial absolute immunity. In the end, the gavel that sentenced Marcus Johnson did not just fall silent. It was seized, examined, and found to be corrupt. And the woman who stood up to seize it proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against a broken system is not a badge, but the truth it forces into the light. The battle for Marcus was over, but the war for justice, armed with new tools and hardened resolve, was just entering a new phase. The story of Marcus Johnson and his mother is a testament to a terrifying truth, that in America, innocence is not always enough. Our system does not just occasionally fail. It contains built-in pathways that can and do lead the innocent to prison. These pathways are worn smooth by bias, by ambition, and by a preference for finality over fairness. Marcus was one data point in a national statistic, but his case became a lever. It proved that when the details of a single injustice are examined with relentless precision, they can expose the fractures in the entire structure. The Sentinel Protocol and the new conviction integrity units it inspired are not magic solutions. They are diagnostics. They are the system beginning to audit itself because the public demanded it. The enduring question this story leaves us with is not whether there are more innocent people in prison today. The data tells us there are thousands. The question is whether we have the collective will to find them. It requires viewing every conviction not as a closed case, but as a living document, one that must be open to scrutiny. It requires protecting the whistleblowers like the lab tech and the detective who finally spoke up. And it demands that we redefine strength in our legal system. From securing convictions to pursuing justice, even when that means admitting a catastrophic mistake. Ilara Vance used a specific set of skills to save her son, but the lesson is universal. It is about applying scrutiny to power. It is about refusing to accept the official story when it doesn't add up. For every case overturned by DNA, there are dozens without biological evidence, where the only hope is someone willing to re-examine the paper trail, to listen to the ignored, and to follow the fear in a corrupt man's eyes. The gavel that sentenced Marcus is silent. The one that freed him echoes. That echo is now a tool, a blueprint for the next mother, the next journalist, the next lawyer who finds themselves facing a wall of indifference. The fight has moved from a single courtroom to courtrooms across the country, to legislative chambers, and to the court of public opinion, where the demand for accountability grows louder. This is how systems change. Not all at once, but case by case, truth by truth. It starts when someone decides that the badge they carry is not a symbol of authority to be obeyed, but a mandate for integrity to be upheld. If you found this story compelling, make sure you subscribe. We bring you deep dives into the stories where justice is contested, power is challenged, and ordinary people are forced to become heroes. Your subscription ensures you won't miss what we uncover next. Thanks for watching.